how much will I lose if I lose? Can I honestly live with that kind of loss over and over comfortably? And so we kind of talked about allowing storage to come back here on this time frame, and it's kind of doing everything that we kind of discussed, right? So we like the orange movement monitor, which we have not seen since back here, right? But we also saw that when we saw it, it didn't necessarily mean a rocket ship, right? So we know that if we simply just pay attention to the history of orange on this chart, what it means and what it doesn't necessarily mean, and what kind of potential it simply introduces, right? So anytime that it kind of has turned into a rocket ship, we have seen orange, right? It went there, and then we had a little bit of a cool down, and then it went there. So before you knew it, it was at the top of the channel. We saw a moment of orange here, and it did not necessarily mean that we went on a rocket ship, right? So that is kind of, I think, a good thing to consider. But could it? And that is what we're basing our asymmetry on. Could it? And is there any kind of logic behind setting that up as a potential reality, right? Yes, in this case, I think it's very, very potential. I think it has a lot of potential. That probably didn't make sense, but I think it has a high degree of potential, right? And is there some logic behind it? Yes, that the channel kind of says this is the top, this is the bottom, based on the 2 hour. And again, we talked about 2 hour times 200, 400. 400 divided by 24 is, 16, 17 day channel, right? So over the course of about a half a month, it's respected this channel to a reasonable degree. So could it at least go here? Yes. I think there's definitely some logic that says it could. And then if a person really wants to, they want to kind of understand what's going on in larger time frames. Is there a reason that it won't go there? And they might look at something like this, right? Here is a relatively well-respected top. I only see one time, right? Here's the bottom. This was really nicely respected. And it's kind of, gone out of the mid part of it once, twice, and these kind of don't really count. We never really had closings there. So is it still kind of on the top side? Could it easily go here? Absolutely. And then again, the top side of that smaller time frame channel is actually a bit higher. And so I would look at this and I would say I'm going to set my conservative asymmetry like expectations, somewhere in there. If I really want to use the pressure line to say the absolute minimum that I'm hoping for, that I'm basing my trade on when I ask the is this worth it to me question, is the asymmetry worth it to me question, it would be something like this, right? And we talked about how I'd rather be in the trade at this lower entry because chances are I can move my stop loss up or I can implement a trailing stop loss somewhere in there. I'd rather be in that position of profit and protected profit when I get to this little pressure line stack of 3 than be in a position of vulnerability, right? Like if I entered the trade right here and I tried to tighten up the asymmetry even, I'm in a bit of a position of vulnerability that I could just easily get stopped out. I could lose my 1.18% and whatever that means. So I'd rather do it here. And then I have to ask myself the question from the checklist, does this make sense for me? And so I'd run through the real numbers. What happens if I put this much money in, I get this kind of organic return, I have 1.21 as my organic risk. If I want my real capital at risk for this position to be no more than 5%, I have to do a little bit of math to figure out, does it make sense for me to do this with $1,000, $5,000, $2,000, $10,000, $50,000? Everybody's different. I'm definitely not here to talk about position sizes because they will be different for everybody. But I want people to at least be able to appreciate the numbers and the calculation that you can do in advance and the logic you can use, right? So here's the 4 hour. We kind of want to realize that technically the 4 hour could take us there, but the volatility from the 4 hour could easily take us there, right? And so being that it's climbing, that could also be a nice place for a set it and forget it type of trade. And then you'd have to ask yourself, do I want to set it there with the expectation that 10 is about the highest I'll get? No, I want to do one of two things. I want to either have my trade up here a bit tighter, or I want to have my trade down here a bit more conservative, and yet, in a position to give me the 11 risk-reward ratio that I'm looking for. And maybe I take the absolute value that I was going to consider for one trade. Maybe that's $10,000. And instead of doing it in one trade, I put 5,000 in one, 5,000 in the other, and then I do two trades, right? And they both have responsible asymmetry. I'm prepared to lose whatever percent on each of them, right? Maybe it's this 1% with a 3x magnification, right? I'm prepared to lose 3% of $5,000 on each trade. One right here, using the 4-hour volatility line as my threshold, and then hope that I can kind of push through. Or using that 2-hour data, maybe I do something like this up here, and I kind of look to something like this, using the 4-hour movement monitor or the 21 EMA for the 4-hour as my backstop. And then I say, on this one, I think the stop loss is loose, but I think I'm just going to do 3x on this one. So I lose closer to 4.5%, right? So maybe I do something like that. And I have two trades, two different asymmetries, both, about 7 to 11, right? And if I want to keep it tighter, I can, but the tighter the asymmetry, in a way, the more risk you have of having your stop loss hit. So you have to kind of be cautious of that. Asymmetry has to be real. And at the same time, if you're using leverage, you want to have tight asymmetry because you don't want to have your stop loss multiplied by 20, right? Then you have to be really cautious. So the math definitely matters. So with that being said, that's where we're at. I think this still looks like a pretty good entry. I like it. I'd probably be somewhere in there for my first entry. And then I would consider the 4-hour volatility cloud for my second one, right? Maybe if it goes there with this blue line as my hard stop. And then I'd look to see what that is. And I'd say, okay, can I live with 7.57 risk reward ratio? Yes, textbook wise, that's comfortable. Is my entry a non-FOMO intelligent entry based on logic? Yes, I'm literally waiting for the retrace. I'm not FOMOing into price action where it's at, meaning I could miss out, but I'm okay with missing out. And what else? And you have two separate entries, right? And then you have the blue pressure line also as a form of logic. And, on smaller time frames, if a person believes that it's going to drop, you might kind of say, hey, well, why don't I short it? If I'm really that confident that it's going to drop, why wouldn't I short it? So we'll talk about that for a second. I just want to kind of show what I mean when I talk about looking for logic on these time frames, right? Okay, so we want to kind of look at what the lines might look like here. And we want to kind of consider that, right? So if I know the lines are down here for potential entries, then I'm just looking for the blue on blue. And so I just want to make this one point using the 5-minute chart. Somebody might think I want to short here, and here is just, it worked. That's how good the pressure lines are. It worked. But it's the most statistically dangerous place to short because you were technically shorting against orange on orange conditions. And we really had no way of knowing until the orange movement monitor got here. We really had no way of knowing how the price action was going to react to this line. And so a much wiser place to short is when we see that this pressure is clearly being held back by that line. And then maybe an even more intelligent place to short would be somewhere in this range where we start to see a retrace back to the 5-minute movement monitor. We start to see some blue in the movement monitor, and we say, hey, you know what? Maybe somewhere in here would be a good place for that scalping short that I'm looking for, right? And then I would probably go and make sure that my volatility monitor settings are set for scalping. So I'll show you what that looks like too. Okay, so if I'm going to be that guy that's looking for the short, knowing that my bigger picture price that I want to take advantage of is the long down here, but I figure why not short until I get there? I'm comfortable with scalping, then I'd probably do something like this, right? And I'd have to know that scalping can be a bit flippant, but I would say, okay, does this make sense to me now? Does it make sense to scalp down to my entry? And so this would probably be the configuration I would look for. Might even look for like the 12-minute, because I know I'm just looking to take advantage of the scalping. Now the 12-minute is really not that helpful. It hasn't even gone bearish yet. So if I have any logic that I can use at all, it's just literally blue on blue. I'm sorry, not blue on blue, but blue conditions on the 5-minute below a red volatility cloud. And I would look for that retrace back to the 21 EMA for the 5-minute, which I know sounds ridiculous. And it kind of is. We want to be cautious of doing these types of trades. But if I was looking for logic, this is a much better place to trade than just arbitrarily setting this up way over here, right? Because we had no way of knowing, and this is where a lot of people get tripped up, we had no way of knowing that this orange was going to blow through and we would just lose money for no reason. Or like, hey, here's a clear example of how we can kind of wait for conditions to be a little better. Now, we would be entering a trade here, not here. If that feels like a loss to you, then, it shouldn't. And here, at least we have a movement monitor backing up our play for some bearish pressure. It's more likely, right? And even then, it's only the 5-minute. So this is not a trade I would take. As you can see, even on the 5-minute, we're going against the grain on this. But we also know that the 4-hour, we might even see, this trade and how it plays out. But I was going to say, we also know that the 4-hour movement monitor is down here. And we know that the 2-hour movement monitor is roughly down here. So we know we're also dealing with a bit of overextension. And being that we're dealing with overextension, we kind of are, at some point, expecting a bit of reversion. Now, whether or not volatility, takes us out at any given point along the way is, a different story. But we're kind of dealing with a bit of expectation for reversion. And so I just kind of wanted to share that. This is a great example of where a person could literally set a trade like this, which was a bit conservative, and then we get to see, how well the 5-minute, again, volatility monitor holds up, right? And we know how many stripes can show up in these time frames, so I'm not counting on a lot, but if I was going to do it, take a look at how much I'm risking, right? I found a way to risk literally 1/4 of a point. So I'm risking 1/4 of a point here on this trade, which means I could magnify it by about 8x if I wanted to, conservative 5x, and not be in too bad of shape when I lose, right? So I'm totally okay with losing. I would literally lose about 1.5% of my capital. So if I had to be in a trade and I had to test this out, knowing that I could easily get stopped out, it looks like I'm about to, or it may surprise you, it may come back down, but knowing that it's that easy to get stopped out, at least I know that I would only lose about a 1.5% of my capital. See, and when it starts flashing yellow, it's a little dangerous. So that's kind of what I would tell you to look for as far as just conditions that are a bit more conducive to a good short, right? And we'll see where it goes. I'm going to leave this up. We'll see where it goes on the 5-minute. And this also gives you an idea of how flippant the 5-minute is. It also serves to kind of show you that this technically held the body of each candle, but there were numerous points in time over the course of 25 minutes here and another 5-minute here where the wicks just didn't really respect, the volatility cloud. So kind of keep that in mind, and that's kind of what you should expect out of this too. That the wicks may not, even if the body of the candle ultimately respects the volatility cloud, the wicks may not. So we'll see just how close that was, knowing that I'm playing around with something where I'm attempting to have 0.23% precision on a 5-minute chart. That kind of blows my mind that we can do this, but we'll see how it ends up, right? I won't take credit for success because it looks like it's extremely close, but to be within 0.23 or 0.25, to be able to risk that little, allowing you to 5x leverage or 8x leverage your play, still only losing 2.5 or 3% on an 8x leverage, it's a pretty nice scalp, and I don't think most of the world is able to do that. So all of this to say, how much will I lose if I lose? Can I honestly live with that kind of loss? Like, how many times can I live with that loss on that 5-minute chart? And if I can't live with that loss, too many times in a row comfortably, then I shouldn't be playing with that type of trade. I should lower my capital, lower my leverage, find better ways to risk mitigate. Don't enter plays based off 5-minute volatility clouds. Find trades that have pressure line stacks with larger time frame volatility clouds that I can rely on more easily than playing with crazy 5-minute scalps. I do not recommend those at all for anybody, but some of you I know will do them and maybe do well at them. I definitely cannot endorse that for the average participant. So it's all what makes you happy and just being safe and protecting yourself. Okay, so next, will it affect me emotionally if I lost this 4 or 5 times in a row? If so, it's too much. Again, is this well thought out? Have I thought out how many times I can have this kind of loss and how it will affect me emotionally? Because the other thing we don't talk about is how your emotions will carry into the next trade. If you have a massive liquidation, if you ever have in your life, it carries into how you trade for probably years. It did for me, right? I lost $20,000 at one point just in one massive liquidation, and the numbers kept, my capital just kept going down and down and down, and eventually, like, instead of protecting my position or living by these rules, I literally lost everything in that position, right? Everything I had in it. And so I said, I'm never going to do it this way again. And so hence these rules, hence the algos, hence having logic and reasoning and risk mitigation behind the things we do.